Paranormal experiences from real people. Redditor 71, this happened when I was in kindergarten. I live in a small village, so the electricity isn't available 24/7, especially during the monsoon season, and this happened on one of those monsoon days where the electricity went off and my mom was taking a shower while I was sitting in the living room. My mom told me to come with a candle and a lighter because I couldn't light up a candle that time. I was scared, yet I took it to her. Just so you know, the bathroom is near the kitchen and there was a window when you entered the kitchen. Back to the story, I went with the candle and lighter and gave it to my mom, and when I was gonna go back into the living room, I glanced at the kitchen window and noticed a line of people walking, and they were all in a line. I freaked out and screamed. My mom asked me what's wrong. I told her to take a look at the window. She said she saw nothing. This is still a classic story I bring up during family dinners, and none believe it to this day. Sorry for my bad English. Redditor 72, IF23 have never posted on Reddit before but lurk on several subreddits occasionally. My BF24 suggested I post my family's experiences as we have had our fair share over the years. I am not sure where to begin, and English isn't my first language and I'm dyslexic, so apologies if this gets a bit messy. So for backstory, I have lived with my grandparents since high school. Cause of better space. With my parents next door, one of those one house separated in two with separate entrances. We live in the wood with no neighbors in rural northern Norway. Our house is on top of a Viking burial allegedly, and multiple family members have passed away in the house over the decades, both of which might help explain some of the things that have been happening. So to the basic stuff, it's very common to hear noises in the house. From door slamming to footsteps to a couple times what sounded like laughter. I have been home alone before with the front door securely locked all night while my grandparents were on vacation, only to come downstairs in the morning and find every single door wide open, including the one leading to the washroom and the storage, which are always closed. Not to mention, I always make sure all doors are closed properly before going to bed when I'm alone in the house, and while there is always some draft in old houses, it can't just open doors by itself, so we have no idea still how that was possible. We have also had issues with stuff falling off shelves or frequently vanishing only to turn up in strange places, to the point we have a running joke of my late great-grandmother, who passed away in the house in 2004, being the one borrowing stuff, and we will kindly ask her to return it when she is done. Think small items like keys, eating utensils, etc. Now on to the more freaky stuff. There has been 2 occurrences of my grandparents waking up in the middle of the night to something violently shaking their bed. We don't live in an area where visible or noticeable earthquakes can happen at all. My grandfather woke up one night to the figure of what he called an angel watching over him from the corner of his bed, only to vanish after a minute of staring at him. And another time he swore he saw his dead mother watching him from the doorway in the living room. Mind you, both of these were only months before he fell ill and later passed away. Worth mentioning, he has always been sharp and clear-minded. What killed him was his failing lungs from previous lung cancer mixed with pneumonia. My little brother, when he was just a toddler, would on several occasions point at an empty doorway and ask who the man in black was. I myself has seen a tall man in black out of the corner of my eyes several times, always in doorways before vanishing when I look again. For as long as I can remember, several family members have refused to stay the night cause they swear they feel like they are being watched, and I myself has felt that crawling at the back of my neck too many times. Also, our dogs over the years will freak out completely and bark terrified at the air sometimes. Now in November last year is when things got a bit crazy. My grandfather fell deathly ill and had to be picked up by an ambulance while unable to breathe for weeks after. We would have weird stuff happening every day as if our invisible guests were freaking out. I would wake up to the sink turned on in the bathroom next to my bedroom. My PC or other electronics would also turn on by themselves at night after I had gone to bed. Things would fly off shelves and crash to the floor all the time, and doors would slam by themselves. But the thing that scared me the most was one night while I was laying in bed trying to sleep, something punched the mattress next to my head so hard I felt my mattress dip down. It calmed down over time, but it was genuinely stressful to deal with. So my question is, are we being haunted by concerned relatives? Redditor 73, I have so many stories, but Lil try to stick to this one. My brother and son are 2 years apart. Well, at the time my son was about 8 months old and I was at my grandparents babysitting my brother. My brother was sitting on the floor in front of this old-timey floor model TV that they'd had forever. I was fixing lunch with my son on my hip, which the island in the kitchen faced the door to the room my brother was in, so he was in my direct view. I told my brother lunch was ready, come get his plate, and he was like, "Bree, I can't move," and I just looked at him for a second and was confused. So I walked to the doorway of the room he was in to see what his deal was, and my son immediately freaked out and was screaming bloody murder like someone was killing him. So I'm trying to calm my son and look around to see, well, anything really? Nothing. I tell me brother to come here, as I back out of the room, and he's like, "Bree, help me, I can't move." As soon as I stepped out of the room, the baby calmed down a bit and I started yelling for my ex. Quickly tried to explain it to him, meanwhile my brother looks terrified. So my ex walks into the room and I follow him, baby starts screaming, I back out of the room. My ex gets down to my brother's level and was like, "Buddy, why can't you get up?" He says someone is holding my shoulder. My ex looks at me and I'm looking at them, and he tries to coax my brother to stand up and he's frustrated and yells he can't. So my ex physically had to pick him up. He said it felt like my brother weighed 100 pounds and it took effort to pick him up. But as soon as he stepped out of that room, he felt normal again. Redditor 74, I didn't believe in ghost. I was working for a small contractor as a project manager. We had a remodeling job for a woman to replace all floor coverings and paint. We were prepping the house for her to sell. Subcontractors removed the carpet and started painting. One bedroom, the carpet was already removed. Some of the rooms had porcelain tiles that were to remain. Sheet plastic protection was used on the tiled floor areas. Painters called me and said, "We are hearing running footsteps across the plastic, loud booms in the crawl space, and we saw a man walking in the backyard." I met the painters in the driveway pretty angry, and we all went inside to check progress. Immediately upon entering, something ran down a hall and across the sheet plastic and slammed the door. There were booms in the attic that shook the house. We did finish the house by purchasing a loud radio that played music non-stop to drown out the strange noises. Turns out the husband of the owner committed suicide in the bedroom with a shotgun weeks before. During final payment, we asked her about the strange noises, and she told us that we did an excellent job compared to other contractors that refused to work on the house. That explains the stains on the subfloor, wall and ceiling. Redditor 75, just gonna subscribe to this post real quick. Love these stories, lol. Redditor 76, this is an experience my nan and granddad had. My dad was born very early, sometime around the 6th-month mark, and weighed somewhere around 2 pounds. He was born in 1968. He was brought home and my grandparents' expectations were managed as he had many health complications due to how premature he was. One night my grandparents were in bed keeping an eye on their baby, who slept in a cot next to the bed. They both sat up as my great-granddad, who had passed years before, walks through the wall and stands over the cot. Both my grandparent witnessed this as clear as day. My granddad said out loud, "Please don't take him, he isn't ready to go." My great-granddad turned around and just walked back through the wall. A priest was called out not long after, and up until around 15 years ago, there was holy water in a few rooms of my grandparents' house. Redditor 77, when I was a sophomore in college, I was falling asleep when I felt something pushing my legs. It happened twice. I looked down at my legs, saw nothing. The third time I looked down, something caught my eye to the side. There was a woman sitting on my desk 10 feet away from me. I tried to wake my roommate up, and when I looked back, she was gone. Didn't fall asleep for hours. Weird stuff happened in that dorm suite for the entire year. 3 years later, an old friend who was at this time an RA on the floor told me a student reported the exact same thing when he called. Redditor 78, there were times where my brain was getting a little desynchronized while I was falling asleep or waking up. So all of that were just hallucinations caused by my brain acting weird. I woke up midnight, couldn't move, but I've seen 3 orbs in my room, one left far upper corner, the second one right upper corner, flying in little circles and laughing. The third one was just on my right side next to the bed, but I could not see it well as I was laying on my back and couldn't look so far. I woke up in the night, sleeping on my left side, could not move. I felt like some force tried to lift me up. The pressure my body was applying to the bed was getting smaller and smaller till I felt I was barely touching it. Then it immediately let go. Falling asleep could cause awesome sound bugs, Like few quick deep bass kicks separated by half a second and flashes in my eyes. Or losing perception of my weight, or giving me fake informations that I am next to myself. But one thing gave me goosebumps. I woke up again to that shit, but it was early enough for my parents to be still in the living watching some TV, and I said that my brain has heard a scream in the attic this time. They said they did heard it too. No one was brave enough to go there that time. As the only entrance to there was from the house, there was no option anyone could be there. Also my sister, when she was 1, she sometimes woke up with a panic scream pointing a corner in the room. There was nothing in there. We had no gas furnace in the house, so CO intoxication wasn't an option. Redditor 79, TL, DR, family lived in haunted house in Germany for 6 years and crazy shit happened. So my family and I were living in Germany back in the 1980s, and we rented this nice old house. I was 2 at the time and my mom was pregnant with my first brother. Things didn't really start happening until a few months after moving in, and it was pretty weird. The house always had an odd feel to it. But you always get that when you move into a new place, right? Started with things not being where you last left them and kitchen cabinets being open. The main thing was the stairs to the attic. It was out in the open in the hall, right next to my brother's room. It was only like 6 or 7 steps up until you got to the ceiling, and a latch door you could get about 2 steps up, and would immediately be filled with overwhelming dread and fear. I can remember only thinking, get out, get out, get out, get out, over and over until I could walk away. Friends would come over and go up the steps to sit down and would get this look on their faces and just start crying uncontrollably. One night, when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the toilet, which was just across the hallway from my room, after I was done, I sleepily made my way back when I got hit with the coldest blast of air I had ever felt. I was maybe 5 at this time. My neck and back felt tingly and I felt like shivering. I turned to look down the hall and saw the top half of a younger man walking down the hall, and then turned to go down the stairs, but just straight up vanished. I was pretty sure I dreamt the whole thing up. TBH, my mom claims that, while she was pregnant with my first brother, there was an older man that would stand in the doorway and had this aura of, in her words, pure evil and sickness. My mom was super sick, but so was my dad. On the nights the old man was around during her second pregnancy, she says that the younger man would stand in the doorway, but facing away from the bed, and that he made the room calm. The old man never bothered my mom during this time, but after my second brother was born, he stopped guarding the door. My first little brother would have awful night terrors. He would wake up screaming at the top of his lungs like he was being murdered. After my second brother was born, he would have the same terrors. They would wake up screaming at the same time. It was super weird. I would have the same nightmare every night for the 6-ish years we lived in that house. It was always me standing at the base of the stairs to the attic, and then the floor would vanish from under me and I would fall into total darkness. There was no escaping it. I would fall into it every night. Another instance was when my mom told me to stop getting in the cupboards for snacks. I told her I hadn't been in them, and she told me to stop lying or I'd be grounded. She came and grabbed me later that day and took me to the kitchen, pointed to an open cabinet and scolded me. I argued that I didn't do it, and she then pushed me to go put my nose in the corner. She then went back to the kitchen, and then all was quiet, too quiet, like that eerie quiet that creeps you out. I turned around and my mom was just standing in the kitchen doorway, mouth wide open. I asked her if she was okay, and she just continued to look in the kitchen, not moving. I walked up to her and looked in to find every cabinet and door open. We just stood there, shocked and scared. My youngest brother was asleep upstairs in his crib, and my other brother was with my dad at a doctor's appointment. The scariest incident was when my mom was setting the table in the dining room, dad was watching TV, and my brothers and I were playing upstairs, and I heard crashing like glass breaking. I ran downstairs and saw my dad rush into the dining room, and my mom was just standing there, the dishes broken on the floor in front of her. My dad asked if she was okay and went to help her, and she says, "Get out." My dad stops and just turns white as a sheet. I guess they has been hearing the old man in their dreams, nightmares as well, telling them to get out of the house. They didn't tell me till years later. Mom then started screaming, "Get out," over and over again, ripping things off shelves and throwing them to the floor. The weirdest and scariest part was that she then started shouting at us in fluent German. My mom barely spoke any German, just enough to get by. She spoke French and English at the time, and the look on her face was weird. It didn't look like my mother. It's hard to describe. but she looked older, and her eyes were so full of hate. I had never seen my mother look like that before. My father told me to run upstairs and shut the door, and he would come get us when it was safe. I ran and hid with my brothers in their closet, terrified at what was happening. My dad came up sometime later, and I went to see my mother. She was sitting on the sofa sobbing. I remember hugging her, and she held me so tight I could barely breathe. After that possession happened, my mom called in priests to try and cleanse the house. The owner fully cooperated with us after my mom and dad told him, and claimed the old man we described was his grandfather, who had previously owned the house before dying in it. He has no idea who the young man was, though I can remember a priest coming over, and it was so bizarre. He would start to pray to try and rid the home of evil or whatever, and every time something would happen the phone would ring, the postman would knock, my brothers would cry. A truck drove by with his horn going. The priest persisted, but as soon as he started up the stairs to the second floor, he fell down them. He claimed he felt two hands push against his chest, and then he said this was beyond him. He left and we never heard from the church. The final straw was when I was playing in my room and was standing in front of my large mirrored closet, and it fell on me. Luckily, my bed was right next to me, and it stopped the closet from crushing me. I was around 6 at this time. There was no way for me to be able to tip this closet as it was butted up against the wall and was a heavy solid wood, one that came with the house when we moved in. Not to mention I was standing away from it nearest to my bed at this point. We were all stressed out so much so that it was affecting my dad's work. His boss pulled him into his office one day and asked him what was going on. My dad had said he wouldn't believed him if he told him, but I guess his boss persuaded him to. Turns out my dad's boss was a long time practicing Wiccan, and said he could help him. Not sure as to how that conversation went down, as my dad said he doesn't really remember all the details, but he remembers his boss explaining to him the process of cleansing the house and how he had done other ones before ours. So the day comes when my dad's boss turns up to our house with a bunch of his fellow co-workers, friends, and the landlord showed up to help. Everyone gets a task to prevent the cleansing from being stopped, like when the priest had tried. My dad's boss and another guy go down into the cellar to start and gradually moved through the house. My mom and I sat in the living room, and a friend had come to take my brothers to her place. While this happened, I can't remember why I was at the house. TBH, sorry. These guys got to the attic stairs. Shit got real weird. The house felt awful, like the air was buzzing with static, and I felt sick. My stomach. My mother was feeling it too, as I could see her gauging and trying hold everything down. The guys opened the attic and started cleansing, and you could hear things in the house moving. Not sure what it was, but it sounded heavy. Turns out that the source of all the things happening was an old armoire in the attic. My dad told me the landlord recognized it as belonging to his grandfather before he died, and it was full of old clothes, knickknacks, and some Nazi memorabilia. They all first tried to remove the armoire from the house, but it wouldn't budge, so they took everything out of it, and it still didn't budge. They thought maybe it had been nailed to the floor, but found nothing holding it down. They eventually called the other guys, and 6 grown men could not move that armoire. Dad said it was the craziest thing he's ever seen in his life. So my dad's boss and his other Wiccan friend decided to seal the armoire in a circle of salt and sulfur. Once they had completed that ritual, they finished the cleansing of the house, and no lie guys, it was like the house sighed. It felt like a breeze blew through the house, like every door and window had been open on a windy day. They weren't. Everything was closed during the cleansing, and my hair even moved with it. It was so weird then. Silence, not just audibly, but that uncomfortable, heavy feeling the house had always had was gone. It truly felt empty. It was such an odd sensation to me after the house had been cleansed. The attic was locked up, and that was that. No more apparitions, nightmares, fear around the attic steps, no more opening cabinets, and no more possessions. Even though it only happened the one time, my parents were so happy that the people who helped out were invited over quite a few times. My dad says he still talks to all of them to this day, and he said he still feels he can't ever thank them enough for saving us from that horrible nightmare. He even became a Wiccan afterwards, and still casually practices, but not as much as he used to. Anywho, that's my long-ass story of the haunted house I lived in as a child. Sorry it's so long, and I hope you enjoy reading about it. Redditor 80, I have a pic of a large, bright orb in front of me that I couldn't see with my naked eye, and it was February, so no bugs around. I only caught it in one of several pics taken. I'm sure it's something, but that's as close to paranormal I've ever gotten. Redditor 81, living with our in-laws while waiting to move into our new house, and our son was sleeping in his crib upstairs. Heard footsteps running around and assumed he got out of his crib. Went to check and he was tucked in sound asleep. Couldn't have been him because the gate was too high for him to climb into it. Father-in-law woke up from sleep and saw his dog, which passed away 10 years before, curled up on his bed. Wife, when she was younger, woke up with sleep paralysis with the hag floating above her. Nothing else happened in any other house I've lived in before or since. Redditor 82, growing up I lived near a county mall. It wasn't a large mall. In today's world it's been converted to an oversized strip mall with a Walmart. During high school, I worked at an Eckerd there. Right behind the store was a wooded area. This wooded area is where 2 women were murdered in the late 70s, early 80s. On random nights at work, mind you this is late 2000s, you could hear random footsteps coming from the second floor. The second floor was primarily used for storage and there was never anyone up there. However, from time to time, you would hear people walking up there. Everyone who worked at the store knew of it. At first it was scary, but then it was something that you just became used to, since it happened frequently. The steps would last just a quick minute and that was all. The store is now abandoned and I wonder if the paranormal activity is still ongoing. Redditor 83, when I was maybe 12 or 13, my home became very chaotic, which draws negative energy. I saw a little girl standing in the middle of my doorway. She had long dark hair, a white lace nightgown, and no eyes. They were just black sockets. No facial expression. I was terrified and I told my mom and thankfully she believed me. Other times there would be knocks on the walls and doors. The TV would turn on and off by itself. I would see shadows dance across the walls and ceilings. I have had my name shouted at me when there was nobody in my house with me. I have heard people having conversations in another room, and again, no one is there. I had experiences where I heard what sounded like someone running up and down the stairs, and hallway. Our house is old as hell, so everything creaks and makes sound. It's really hard to sneak and be quiet, it's almost impossible to not make noise. We have this creepy attic that is way too high for any child to reach. You have to stand on a chair to even pull the door down. All over that attic door were little, terrifying child-size handprints. The prints were dirty or ashy. I have seen strange mist, smoke, or fog rise up from the floor. I have seen random flashes of light with absolutely no source. Both family dogs have stared, barked, and growled at certain spots where nothing appears to be there. My mom, sister, and friends have had similar experiences in that house. To this day, nothing really happens except an item might disappear, but nothing crazy, thankfully. We still live there. Redditor 84, when I was like 7, I was at my mother's friend's house with her. My mom's friend's name was Jenny. There's this hallway in her home with a door on the left, the right, and the end. We were all in the room on the left. This is the computer room. My mom and Jenny were surfing the web and I was bored, so I went to go see what was in the room at the end. Jenny is wearing all black. It'll make sense later. It's supposed to be a weight room with exercise equipment. I opened a door and there I saw sitting on a machine facing the door was Jenny. I was confused and wondered if she got past me. Perhaps I wasn't paying attention? But as my gaze turns upward I see she's wearing all white and her eyes were voids. The deepest, blackest void of eyes. Though she was without pupils, it was clear she was staring at me. She was only 4 feet in front of me. I was frozen, too scared to move, knowing this isn't right. I yell for my mom. While doing so I turn my head for a split second in search for my mom to see her and Jenny coming for me. I turn back and the thing is gone. It gives me chills down my spine because it's still so vivid and real when I look back on it. I'd what it means and I'd what to make of it. But I know I wasn't hallucinating. Redditor 85, at my old house, something chased me up my stairs. I also had something growl right in my ear one night. Redditor 86, my sister and I are hanging out at my mom's house in rural NC. We are both adults with children of our own. My youngest and her oldest were about 3 at the time and we had put them to bed together. We put them to sleep in the guest bed with pillows set as a boundary around the edge in case they flipped around during the night. A few things to note: this house was built over 100 years ago. It's old. It's also relatively small, the rooms are close together. Anyway, my sister and I are hanging out by ourselves in the living room, just giggling and whatnot, when I hear what sounds like one of the pillows falling off the bed. We kept the guest room open, and again, small house. It's not 20 feet from the living room. I go check it out to make sure the kids are good and notice no pillows have moved. Alright NBT. I go out into the living room again, and a few minutes later, the sound of the pillow hitting the floor. This time we go check together. Still nothing moved. We make our way back into the living room when all of a sudden we hear a loud bang from the attic area. Honestly, by this time I am already kind of freaking out. I am a wimp when it comes to nighttime and noises. I love it, but I'm scared. I grab my sister like WTFF. She's nonplussed. Not even a minute later we hear what sounds like heavy, stomping footfalls in the attic. Going from the corner of the room where we heard the loud bang to the front door. At this point in time, I am really freaking out. My sister, who is younger and tried to pretend to be all hard like she wasn't freaked, is now sort of worried, so we try to wake up our dad, like, yo, go check. We look outside, in the attic. Nothing doing. That was my personal experience with this house. My mom says she's felt someone behind her while she's doing dishes. My daughter says she's had her hair pulled while at the sink. My dad claims that he woke up one night and looked to the side of his bed and saw a woman standing there asking him to go with her. There have been numerous occasions of weirdness. I never really believed or didn't believe in ghosts or paranormal instances. It was more like, it's never happened to me. I'm more apathetic in regards to it. Until that night. I will never question whether things outside of our perceptions exist. They do. Redditor 87, I had a fight with my boyfriend. I left my home in Florida. I went with a friend on a camping trip to North Carolina. One night in the tent I began to doze off at about 9 o'clock. As I was still awake but totally relaxed without opening my eyes, I seemed to open my mind's eyes, and there I saw my boyfriend sleeping in our bed at home in Florida. The bedside lamp was on and he was dozing off lightly, almost in the same way I was. He opened his eyes and he looked at me. He was calm and just looked at me. I seemed to be about 2 feet away and a foot or so above the bed. In my mind I urged him silently not to move, not to breathe, not to get excited, but of course shortly his eyes got really wide, his mouth opened, and he began to move excitedly, and the entire scene vanished like mist. The next day I went down to town and phoned him, and he picked up the phone and began to excitedly blurt out that he had seen me the night before in a quasi-dream-like state. I listened to him explain what he had seen. Then I made him explain it to me all again slowly. I made him explain it to me again, maybe 5 times, and tell me every detail he could possibly remember of the entire event. What was behind my head? Was there any light on my face? What color was the light on my face? Not the bedside lamp. Could he see my eyes? Could he see whether or not there was anybody else in the tent with me, etc.? He confirmed that I was about 2 away from his head and seemed to be about a foot above the bed. This is one of about 10 very strange experiences that have happened to me in my lifetime. Often they seem to only happen when there are witnesses available, due to the fact that as a rationalist person I would never believe them without these witnesses. Redditor 88, I would go with my mom to work when I was around 10. She was a cleaner at ABB, which was known to have some strange things going on there. She would only clean the rooms after the guests had gone out for the day or had checked out, and I would stay with her in the rooms while she was cleaning. One day we were in one of the rooms and she was cleaning the bathroom while I sat on the bed watching her. She had grabbed a glass cleaning spray for the mirror in the bathroom and she was about to spray the mirror when she had suddenly stopped and was looking into the mirror. The mirror was facing the door, and past the door was the bed I was sitting on. She turned around and was looking at me with a concerned expression on her face, and she said to me to stand up and come over to her in the bathroom. Obviously at the time I didn't know what she was getting at, and I said, why? So this time she repeated herself and said with a very stern voice, which was very unlike her, to stand up and come over to her, which I did at that point. And as I started getting up, I saw in the mirror past her a sort of dark figure sitting behind me and was looking in our direction. And at that point, for probably the first time in my life, I felt true chills wash over me. Then my mom grabbed my arm and we walked out of the room and down the hallway, making our way down the stairs and into the main living room, and we just sat down in there for a good 10-20 minutes. She still had a job to do, so she told me to stay downstairs until she was done, and she went back up and finished cleaning. I assume whatever was there was gone by the time she went back up, but it always has stuck with me and was a cause for my anxiety and paranoia even to now. There are a lot more stories my mom has told me about her time working there and past weird instances she has experienced in her life, but that was the one and only experience I had while there with her that I thought I would share. Redditor 89, when my grandmother passed, I traveled back with my brother to the village we grew up in and stayed in the family home. It's a small space with a lot of land around it, agricultural, but no one is producing on an industrial scale, basically a barter type economy, close bonds between neighbors. As is traditional, my grandmother was held in repose in the living room, and my brother and I ended up having to share a bed in my niece's room. Our sister hadn't moved out. House had 4 generations until grandma died. Although it was upsetting for me, my brother was much more affected by her death. He was the eldest and their bond was different to what me and sister had with her. We arrived in the morning 2 days before the funeral and had lunch with the extended family. Felt weird being at the house without grandma alive. She'd been a constant presence, very much a matriarch, could be cold but wasn't unkind. After lunch we went to the cemetery. It's a small village and the graves are only 15 minutes walk away. 3 generations are buried there, and she'd long reserved the plot where our family and granddad are buried. It was to be dug out for the burial the next day. As upset as everyone was, with it being a chance to catch up, we stayed up at the house that first night drinking shots and reminiscing. Probably got to bed around 2 a.m., desperately trying not to wake up our niece. I don't remember falling asleep, or dreaming, but suddenly felt a jolt, not like I was being shaken but almost as if someone was trying to waken me. I remember clearly hearing my grandfather's voice saying she's worried, go find him, but not knowing what was meant and briefly I think going back to sleep. Then I heard my grandmother scream no and bring him back. At this point I woke up, dazed, in a pitch dark room. I lay in bed a few moments, a bit unsettled but more than anything confused, trying to process the dream and where I was. Heard some movement and quietly asked my brother if he was up. My niece crawled onto the mattress and hugged my arm. Then she said, I'm worried. Uncle X has been gone an hour. By now my eyes were adjusting and I could see his side looked empty. I looked back at her and noticed how wide her eyes were. She whispered, he's at the cemetery, he left his phone. By this point I'm starting to freak out a bit, so I throw on some clothes and head out toward the cemetery. It's so cold out I do a 180 as I open the door, changing coat and grabbing a scarf. I then run to the graveyard. It's not too far, but long enough to start questioning what I'm doing. When I arrive there is nothing to suggest anything is going on, and I wonder whether I've been set up by my niece and brother, although it doesn't explain the dream. Seeing as I'm there I go in to check the graves and family plot. As I approached I became conscious of a faint scrabbling noise and I felt scared. There were candles flickering, not much light to go on. But I was sure I could see a silhouette of something over grandma's plot. I pulled out my phone and turned on the torch. In front of me was my brother, wearing only trousers and boots, on his hands and knees, digging out the grave with his hands. He just looked at me and said, knew she would tell you. Redditor 90, we were on vacation at a resort city. Wife and I are sound asleep and I felt something pull my toe. As I came out of my sleep I felt a strong presence of one of my kids and thought they had woken and come in our room. I said something along the lines of, what do you need, honey? Opened my eyes and saw the apparition kind of float from the foot of our bed around to my side. My wife had awoken before I said anything and saw it and just said, oh my God. It was clearly a little girl, looked about 2 or 3, and after several seconds it just disappeared. We both felt a very sweet spirit from it. We had a miscarriage of a girl a year or so before that. Neither of us ever experienced anything like it before and never really believed in ghosts. But we both think, or maybe it's hope, that it was the spirit of the daughter we lost just checking in. Redditor 91, my grandma's story, not mine's. I don't think this is haunted, but around June of 2018 or 2019 me and brother and mom went to the training place where my brother trains at for karate. Nothing really happened at the training place. I hung out with some friends though. Also to remind, a person who went to visit to the old owner's house, which is the place I live now, had gotten murdered before visiting, and also this was or near the date of my other grandfather's birthday, who had gotten murdered as well, like in the 1980s. When I came back home, my grandma dad's side had reported the door opening and closing multiple times when we weren't here. The windows in the room were closed tight. My mom locks all the windows and stuff before leaving. This was also before we got my cat, which means my grandma was the only person there. She was in the living room. She also heard a bunch of things moving upstairs and stuff. Also, my other grandpa who died was from my mom's side, and my grandma on my dad's side, so they didn't know each other at all ever. This wasn't the only time the door kept closing and opening randomly. When I was playing a game downstairs with my brother, the door kept opening and closing, eventually to the point where it actually closes itself and can't be opened without force. My cat also has a habit of going upstairs, meowing, looking at the door that opens and closes and just stares at it. There hasn't been recent experiences like this. The door literally have not gotten a single fix. Redditor 92, one time in my house of my grandfather's with my cousin men while everybody sleep because we don't have sleep. We sleep in the living room near of the prenuptial entrance to the house, and start talking about our lives, and then we heard someone knocking the door. We think could be our uncle. He is the only person who lives near because we are in a farm and his house is the only house 20 meters around, and he likes do jokes to us. We think he do another of his jokes, then knocking the door again, and we open the door, and we didn't see nothing. Then tell to my cousin, I watch under the door and my single you open the door. We would ting at the door when I hear boots walking near the door, and I saw a pair of boots, and yelled now, and we saw nothing. Swear I see a pair of boots, and the next second vanished. We still in silence and go to sleep. My mother tell me in this place where my grandma house is normal see gossips, and I have more bizarre histories like this. Redditor 93, my little brother died in March of his junior year of high school. We had lived in an older early 1910s two-story home. The only bathroom was on the upper level, and those stairs were always loud and creaky. His after-school routine always started with him running up the stairs at about 3:15 p.m. to take a pee before doing whatever was next on his daily agenda. After he died, there was a lot of commotion in the house with relatives and friends for the next week. Once things quieted down and we're all trying to get on with finding our new norm, my mom and I heard the familiar sound of someone running up the stairs. We both looked at each other as there wasn't anyone else in the house at the time. We looked at the clock and it was 3:15. This continued like clockwork every weekday for the rest of that school year. Never on Saturday or Sunday. The sound of phantom footsteps jogging up those old stairs at 3:15 was one of the most comforting sounds to me. It's been nearly 20 years, but I still think about that sound often. Redditor 94, I was home alone and fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, there was popcorn all over the living room floor next to me. The popcorn bag was in the pantry closet in the kitchen. A friend brought a keyboard to our house at Christmas and was playing Christmas songs for a few of us. My dog suddenly sat down, looked up at the ceiling and started wagging his tail. The room suddenly felt very cold. I was in the family room and heard a clattering noise in the kitchen like someone was playing in the silverware drawer. I slowly approached the doorway into the kitchen, but the drawer slammed shut as I peeked around the corner. I woke up in the night to go pee, and when I came out of the bathroom I heard laughing down on the first floor, and then a child's voice screamed, "Mommy!" Our house was built in 1982, but it was built on a site where a tavern from the early 1800s previously stood. Other family members had experiences, but this is what I experienced firsthand. Redditor 95, I was at a small theater after a performance with my castmates, and we were putting set pieces away so the stage would be clear for classes the next day. There was a small closet where we stored paintings and other flat stuff, and I went to put a large painting away. Something was blocking it, it seemed, so no matter how I pushed or wiggled, the painting would not slide in between two others. All of a sudden, the painting in my hand jerked into place, like someone had pulled from the other side. I was standing in the only entrance and there was no one in the closet with me. I'd never had an experience before that in my life, and many long-time students and staff at that studio claimed there was a ghost there. I believe them now. Redditor 96, experienced astral projection as a kid and was freaked out when I saw the movie Insidious. Lived in a dorm that was earlier a lodge where there used to be banging and knocking sounds on our door late at night and even in empty rooms. Had scratch marks on body. Someone used to pull our sheets while we slept. so we were forced to sleep with our lights on, seeing dark shadows passing in our corridors from empty corners. Being tripped or pushed while walking. Freaky. Redditor 97, the first experience of my life I would define as paranormal occurred when I was around 9 years old. I had always been a fitful sleeper as a child and would routinely wake up in the middle of the night and wander my house. For context, the house I grew up in as a child had a connected kitchen and living room with a bar separating them. My room branched off of the living room and my parents' branched off of the kitchen. I had woken up in the middle of the night parched, so I climbed out of bed and walked through the living room into the kitchen and filled my glass from the sink. As this was my routine, I hadn't turned on any lights since I had the layout of my home memorized, and the moonlight coming through the blinds illuminated the house pretty well that night. So here I stood in near absolute darkness sipping my glass of water in the kitchen when I heard something I had never heard before on one of the late night wanderings. Footsteps. The sound of heavy boots walking across the tile in the living room. In my half-awake stupor, I convinced myself it was my mother getting home from work, as she had been working graveyard shifts at her job from time to time. A perfectly reasonable explanation. Except something told me to peek in her room. So I silently crossed the kitchen and peered through my mother's bedroom door, only to see her already laying in bed, lit by moonlight coming through her cracked window blinds, and the boots in question sitting next to her door. In the moment I made note of this, the footsteps stopped. I peered around the bar into the living room, noting in the low light that there was no one there. I slowly crept through the living room to get back to my bed, and as I was about halfway, the footsteps began moving in my direction. I ran. And so did they. As I got through the door into my room, I slammed it shut, locking it behind me. The footsteps stopped outside of my door. You see though, there was a small vent on the wall by the door I could look through to see the area in front and my door, and as I peered through I was more frightened by what wasn't there. The space in front of the door and the living room beyond was completely empty. So I hid under my covers until morning, unable to fall back asleep. I had asked my family members about that night as I grew up, but no one could ever explain it to me. Redditor 98, was sleeping at a hotel with my family one night and I heard someone whisper my name while I was about to sleep. Being 9 and scared as shit, I hid under my blanket and waited for like 30 minutes or so until I called to my parents and they calmed me down somehow. This was in the oldest wing of the hotel, built around the 1900s. Another time, I was reading this paranormal book or SMTH and I felt something kind of like head pat me, but with only fingers. Thing is, the direction of the path was going backwards, and I was sitting on a couch, with nothing but a window behind me. I'd taken probably phased through walls or some shit. Anyways, I just got weirded out and went on with my day. If you want to ask ABT how cringe I was as a kid, I believed in that ancient alien show on History Channel. I'm much older than that now though, and that's a past that I left in the past anyways. Redditor 99, when I was 5 years old I walked into my parents' basement to get a waffle from the deep freeze. Now beside the deep freeze there was a small space maybe a foot or two apart, and on the other side was the washing machine. As I walked downstairs and was about to open the deep freeze, I stopped and just started at the person who was sitting in the space. He was a man who wore army fatigues and was evidently very upset, as his head was between his knees and he was squeezing his temples with his knees. I felt no fear, no shock, more of an eerie feeling like I know this isn't supposed to be here, but I'm not scared for some reason. I told my parents what I saw and they stated that some children are able to see spirits because they are closer connected to the spirit world than adults. Redditor 100, when I was teeny tiny we lived in 400-year-old cottages which were built by my family ancestors. Apparently I used to sit in my cot when I was just at that learning to talk stage and have conversations with people my mom and dad couldn't see lol. Sadly, the cottages were demolished and new houses replaced them. People have reported ghosts there though.